Welcome friends, Tapas and Kalina here from Eat, Read, Sleep. Today we're excited to provide you the book summary for Dare to Lead, written by Brene Brown. Published in 2018, this book takes on issues we see in modern day workplaces. Brown and her team points out problems that we see in many organizations. Problems like shame and fear of failure, lack of trust and engagement, and even passive aggressive behaviors.
Yikes. Does that sound familiar to you? If so, you won't be surprised to hear that all this leads to employees holding back ideas, avoiding risks, especially avoiding tough conversations. You wouldn't be surprised to see lack of growth in ideas. In order for companies to succeed and be healthy, Brown says that we need brave leaders and courageous cultures. We need what she calls daring leadership.
That's right. Unfortunately, daring leadership is made up of 4 skills that anyone can learn. Rumbling with vulnerability, living into your values, braving trust, and learning to rise.
So let's see how we can get started with the first skill, rumbling with vulnerability. What does that mean? Rumbling is to have the courage to speak up, and vulnerability is the feeling we get when we face uncertainty and the risk of emotional hurt. So instead of hiding behind masks and armors to protect ourselves, we need to have the courage to speak up and be honest and open. Now, the problem is many people think that vulnerability is weakness. You hear things like, oh, I don't do vulnerability, or I don't need anyone else. But the truth is, we get to control our vulnerability. Vulnerability is a learned skill, and vulnerability is actually tied to courage, not weakness. This is what leads to Brown's call to courage, the courage to face your fears and provide clarity. This is where she introduces clear is kind, unclear is unkind. When you feed people half-truths or BS to make someone feel better, that's unkind. When you aren't clear with expectations to avoid your own discomfort, that's unkind. And when you talk about others instead of to them, that is also unkind. So face your fears in order to be kind. Give yourself permission to have the courage to serve others kindly.
The next thing Brown talks about is Armory. A lot of leaders keep emotions out of workplace. They put up an armor. They think emotions make them inefficient and weak. In reality, the opposite is true. And that's because when you put up an armor, it actually kills courage, curiosity, and innovation. When you lock away your heart or feelings, you also lock away your empathy and emotional literacy. This leads to people feeling disconnected, disengaged, and suffer from lack of courage and performance. Brown goes to 16 types of armor that most people wear, but the 3 most common are perfectionism, foreboding and joy, and numbing. So take a look for yourself. Are you leading from armored leadership or brave leadership?
Now, we can't talk about vulnerability without mentioning shame and empathy. Shame is a feeling that we're not good enough. This can surface anytime. But the truth about shame is that everyone has it. We're all uncomfortable talking about it, and the more we avoid it, the more power it has over us. While empathy, on the other hand, is the opposite of shame. Empathy is a way to heal shame. Empathy is connecting with someone's feelings and letting them know that we're with them in their pain. We need to be able to recognize shame within ourselves and understand its triggers. This will build resilience so that we can identify it in others and help them.
And the last part of rumbling with vulnerability is curiosity and grounded confidence. This is the whole idea of we don't know what we don't know. Get curious and ask things like, tell me more, I'm curious about, or help me understand. Respond rather than react. Trust the process of learning and unlearning, practicing and failing. Over time, you will build grounded confidence.
The second set of skills is living into your values. Daring leaders who live into their values are never silent about hard things. Practice what you preach. In order to do that, you have to know what your values are. Sometimes work can get so stressful that you can lose yourself, maybe even have thoughts of quitting. But having 1 to 2 core values and sticking to them will help you stay grounded, even when things don't go as planned. And the great thing is that this one set of values doesn't change. It is the same for the workplace and at home, at all times.
All right, let's talk about trust. Braving trust, that is. The third skill set of daring leadership. Trust is choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person. Why is trust important? Trust is required for meaningful relationships and teamwork. We feel vulnerable when our trust isn't on the table, and even reach for our armor and close our hearts when we go into lockdown mode. When we're in lockdown mode, it's hard to process anything at all. And this lockdown happens to all of us. It's a scientific process where our limbic system gets hijacked and it forces us to go into survival mode. This happens in real life emergency scenarios, and it also happens at work. To rumble about trust, you have to be specific. There are 7 specific behaviors to build self-trust and trust in teams. And this is what Brown calls braving inventory.
And it's pretty easy to remember. Just spell out braving. B is for boundaries, respecting boundaries and asking questions when you're unsure. also knowing that it's okay to say no. R is for reliability, or doing what you say you'll do. Know your limits so you don't overpromise. A is for accountability, which means owning your mistakes, apologizing, and making amends. V is for vault. Lock it up and keep your mouth shut. If it's not your info to share, don't share it. I is for integrity. Do what's right, not what's popular. Practice your values versus talking about your values. N is for non-judgment. Ask for what you need and share your feelings without judgment. And G is for generosity. Be generous with your intentions, your words, and interpretations of others. And that's Braving Inventory. By putting the Braving Inventory into practice, you can become a daring leader who is both courageous and trustworthy.
And that leads us to our last skill set, learning to rise. She writes, own the story and you get to write the ending. Deny the story and it owns you. Learning to rise is to prepare for the bounce back of failures. Brown gives an example of skydiving. You have to teach safe landing before you jump out of a plane. Teaching someone how to land as you're falling is pretty useless. So before you skydive into vulnerability, make sure you have skills and systems to bounce back from failures. Remember that leaders have to be resilient.
That's right. And when it comes to your organization, teaching resiliency must be done upfront as well, before any setbacks or failures. This way, people learn better how to get up after they fall. They're more prepared to get back up and more willing to take risks. So tell them, hey, we expect you to be brave. That means you should expect to fall, but that's okay because we've got a plan. When you do this, you teach people to see failures as a learning opportunity.
So let's get ready to skydive. Before we do, Brown puts this whole process together nicely in what she calls the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution. The reckoning, this means to immediately identify your emotions when you have a setback and get curious about what's going on. Slow down, breathe, connect your body, and pay attention. Most importantly, don't offload your emotions onto others or take out your armor. The rumble, when we don't have all the details, it's natural for us to assume or make up stories. The story making is what Brown calls a shitty first draft. This is a destructive story that you need to take control of before you react. Have the power to say, does that even make sense? And finally, the revolution. This is defined by courage and authenticity. This is taking off your armor, rumbling with vulnerability, living into your values, braving trust with open hearts, and learning to rise so we can write our own stories and act out the revolution.
The revolution! I love that. And that's the main gist of the book. However, before we wrap up, it is important to mention one last thing, the myth of perfectionism. We need to talk about it because perfectionism will prevent us from learning to rise. Many think that perfectionism is about striving for excellence. But the sad truth is, perfectionism is not about a healthy achievement or growth at all. It's nothing but a defensive move. Why? Perfectionism is not about self-improvement because it's about trying to earn approval. Perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system. And in reality, perfectionism does not exist. It's an unattainable goal that many people find themselves striving for. It's more about perception rather than internal motivation or growth, and there's no way to control perception.
In today's work, leaders are becoming less courageous and less authentic. Brown feels the world needs a revolution. In essence, this is a rebellion. Rebel to be authentic, vulnerable, and courageous. All right, guys, that's Dare to Lead. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video if you really liked it. Double click the like button if you didn't like it. And comment below if you learned something new. All right, guys, Dare to Lead. Bye. This happens to us in the last, and that leads us to our last skill set, learning to rise.
I didn't even get this happens to us.
I said it so
Sorry.
well. I said it.
I was like, wait.
I recovered so well. And then I see you laughing.
Sorry.